Well, the Chinese trade action is seen as an attempt to apply economic pressure to Canada because of the arrest of senior Huawei telecom executive Meng Wanzhou, who's facing extradition to the United States. Guy Saint-Jacques is a former Canadian ambassador to Beijing, and he joins me now. Mr. Saint-Jacques, thank you for taking time again to speak with me today. I do appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Let's start with that notion there that the Canadian government it's being careful to avoid linking the detention of Meng Wanzhou to China's ban on canola. Do you have any doubt those two things are connected?
I have no doubt at all. And in fact, talking with a number of businessmen in recent weeks and days, I can tell you that the measures are spreading. Now it's not only canola, but what we see are increasing delays for peas exports, for soybeans, for pork. And this just confirms that the Chinese government is sending the message to its importers that if you are going to import agri-food products from Canada, you could be faced with delays. So people are switching to other countries. The other thing that I have learned last week is that the Chinese government has asked all Chinese provinces to do an inventory of ongoing transactions with Canadian companies, and this shows that they are just looking at the whole gamut of measures that they could take in the future. I have also heard that the delivery of some of our goods and products has been canceled, and therefore we are at a stage where I think the Canadian government will have to very soon to take its own measures.
Okay, so to be clear, your contacts are telling you that the situation now involving canola, and as you said, mentioning to some other, spreading to some other crops as well, that it's likely to get worse because China is now doing this inventory, this audit of all the products coming from Canada to various Chinese provinces, looking at the possibility of cracking down even further, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so let's talk about how Canada responds. It's been 3 months since the former ambassador to China, Minister McCallum, was fired from that job. He's yet to be replaced. Does that hurt Canada's ability to get this dispute with China resolved?
Well, of course, I think it would help if we had an ambassador in place. But on the other hand, we have a very good chargé d'affaires, and we have to understand that access is limited in any case in Beijing. And what I've heard also is that the Chinese are refusing to meet with our representative unless we come up with the promise that Mrs. Meng will be freed up. And this is something that we cannot do. The other thing that has to be understood is that even if we were to select someone and send what we call the request for agrément to the Chinese government, in fact, they could show their displeasure and refuse to provide this agrément right away. And so that means that there is no guarantee that, in fact, they would approve the new ambassador. And so, therefore, for me, this is not an essential condition to try to resolve the issue at this stage.
Okay, so one of the things Mr. Scheer talked about today as well was that Canada should withdraw its $256 million in funding from the Asian Infrastructure Bank. That's China's multilateral infrastructure bank. Would that be a smart play at this point on Canada's part?
Well, I think it would be noticed in Beijing, but I think that knowing the impact that this crisis is now having on Canadian companies, I think we have to come up with something that is much wider than that. And what I would recommend to the government is that a major speech is done either by the Minister of Foreign Affairs or the Prime Minister even to announce that Canada is dropping the idea of concluding a free trade agreement with China by saying that to conclude such an agreement, you need to have mutual respect and trust is gone clearly. I would also announce that Canada is taking China to the WTO to protest about what it's doing to our canola exports and what it's starting to do to our other agri-food exports. And you will recall that in last year's budget, it was announced that additional resources would be devoted to China. I think it's time, knowing now that the market conditions are getting pretty difficult, I would reassign these resources to other markets in Asia to fully benefit of the other free trade agreements that we have concluded in recent years, including with South Korea or with the new TPP. Mr. Abe was just in town. Japan is still a very good market. On top of that, I think also that we need to take other measures. I would suggest that we expel Chinese athletes that are training in preparation for the Winter Olympics that will take place in Beijing in 2022. We know that there are some Chinese spies in Canada. I think, again, it's time to expel them. And obviously, we need to completely reassess our engagement strategy with China.
Well, so the things you've talked about, and Mr. Scheer also made that proposal today that Canada launch a WTO complaint against China over the canola dispute. These are all things that would be seen as escalations to the Chinese, clearly. So how does Canada benefit from that?
Well, I would ask, what is the alternative? Here we are taking a low profile. Has this helped in any way Mr. Kovic or Mr. Spaver? By the way, come June 10, the Chinese government has to decide whether they will file formal charges of espionage against them or if they will extend the interrogation phase, because under Chinese law, they are allowed 6 months for that. But so far, we have achieved nothing. Now we are seeing that our exports are taking a beating. And the only language that China understands is a language of firmness. And I think we have to be tough, but we have to be smart. We have to take measures that won't be easy to be replicated by China, because, of course, they will want also to add pressure on their side. But I think that we have to show our own displeasure. We have to continue also to seek support from our allies and from Asian countries. This was discussed yesterday by the Prime Minister when Prime Minister Abe was in town, but we have also to seek more support from the like of Singapore, Vietnam, South Korea, and hopefully this will help to move the issue ahead. But at this stage, again, I would argue that we are faced with a problem that is going to get worse, because if only the extradition process of Mrs. Wong is going to take months, if not years, and therefore we have to push back on China. Otherwise, our exports will be greatly reduced, and we will suffer the consequences. And this will become a big electoral issue during the upcoming campaign.
All right, fair enough. Yeah, and you're right to point out we can't lose sight of the fact here that 2 Canadians remain under detention in China, and we continue to watch how that case unfolds as well. Lots to consider there, Guy Saint-Jacques. Thank you for your time tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.